Our next speaker, again, is an individual who has an amazing story and a lot of wisdom to share. She's coming to us today from all the way from London, but she's had a few stops along the way and some very unique experiences. The title of the presentation is The Mountain Within, Leadership Lessons and Inspiration for Your Climb to the Top. I think you'll really enjoy what Herta has to say. I'll just read her bio. Some of you may have seen it online, but I'll just give you the highlights. Herta von Stiegel is founder and CEO of Area Capital Group Limited, a financial services firm focusing on sustainable investments in Africa. The firm operates from London, Gaborone, and the Channel Islands and focuses on three mutually reinforcing sectors: clean energy, financial institutions, and telecommunications. An international executive with a consistent track record of building profitable, structured finance businesses, she held senior positions at Citibank and JP Morgan, and until 2005 was managing director at AIG Financial Products, the financial services division of American International Group. A U.S. tax lawyer by training, she practiced law prior to becoming a banker, specializing in international taxation and mergers and acquisitions. She holds a JD degree from Cooley Law School in Michigan, Master's of Law degree from Taxation in New York University, and a BA from Andrews University, and completed the executive program in corporate finance from London Business School. She's a member of the State Bar in Michigan and New York. She serves on several boards, including Camco International, Opportunity International. She founded, until 2010, chaired the Princess Trust Women's Leadership Group, and on and on. In 2008, she embarked on a very unique project. She led a multinational and multi-ability team to climb Africa's highest mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, I know there's individuals in here who have also climbed that mountain, and co-produced an inspirational award-winning film called The Mountain Within, and that's the subject of her book and a documentary. Despite the climbers' physical challenges, 16 of the 28 climbers, almost 60%, reached the top, a significantly higher result than the usual statistic of 35%. Her book, with the same title as the film and subtitle Leadership Lessons and Inspiration for Your Climb to the Top, has been published by McGraw-Hill. And that book is available for Herta to sign now and also tonight. Lastly, born in Transylvania. I'm not sure how many other people here were born in Transylvania. I suspect, if you're out there, please put up your hand. Anyone? No. She has lived and worked in numerous developed and emerging markets, is a citizen of the U.S. and the U.K., bilingual in English and German, and fluent in Romanian. Any Romanian speakers here? No. So we have just one more uniqueness. Herta, please come up. So if you can welcome Herta von Stiegel.
Thank you very much, Rick. I just want to assure you, don't worry, I am fine till midnight, even though I was born in Dracula country, so it should be okay. I am very, very conscious of the fact that I am standing between you and lunch, and earlier the comment was made that one of the speakers stood between us and the break, but lunch is a real significant slot in the day. But before we do that, I'm going to make you tired, and I'm going to take you up and down Mount Kilimanjaro, and I believe it will be a journey that you will enjoy taking with me. The mountain within. Why in the world would an investment banker actually decide to take a group of disabled and non-disabled climbers up Kilimanjaro? And there are basically three reasons for it. One, first of all, for me, it was unfinished business. You know, my husband and I used to go on safari, and I remember looking at Kilimanjaro, and I said to Hans, you know, I want to climb that mountain for my 40th birthday. And he looked at me like I had two heads, and I'm sure he was thinking, this too shall pass. But we got back to London, and I started to really train and exercise, and he said to me, you're serious about this, aren't you? I said, yeah, I really want to climb that mountain. To make a long story short, that attempt to summit Kilimanjaro was an abysmal failure, and I will talk about that just a bit more. So not having reached the top for me was unfinished business. Secondly, I really wanted to help a friend. I was on the board of a disability charity that was doing amazing work, but nobody had heard of it. And I said, oh, I've got this brilliant idea of how to raise the profile of this charity. And it literally came to me while I was running on the treadmill. And again, my husband was the victim. I just turned to him and I said, darling, I know this great idea of how to raise the profile of Enum. You know, we take a group of disabled and non-disabled climbers and we team them up with non-disabled buddies. Blah, blah, blah. By the time I finished, I had the whole plan mapped out. And again, he looked at me. I can't believe I married this woman. But the plan was formed, and the plan was formed in this amazing way. But then I had the idea also that we needed to film this, because if we were going to get these amazing people up Kilimanjaro, we should have a record of it. And I really wanted to make the documentary, and we co-produced it for two reasons. I wanted to show in a very beautiful way that everybody is entitled to his or her dream, regardless of race, gender, ability, whatever. Everybody's entitled to his or her dream. And secondly, that we can achieve so much more together than any one of us separately. And this second message is equally important to the first one, because we have touched on financial crises and moral crises and so forth. And I firmly believe that the crisis we are in right now is much more than a financial crisis. It really is a crisis of leadership. It's a crisis of principles. And I think we really need to have a different leadership paradigm. It has to be a leadership paradigm of collaboration, where we come together from different aspects, different parts of the world, and actually come together as Christians, as people of the world, to really make a difference. So why The Mountain Within? This title was actually very, very carefully chosen, because invariably when we are thinking about conquering, when we are thinking of making a difference, of achieving something, we tend to think in terms of we have to overcome those external mountains, don't we? That boss that is giving us a hard time, or the bank that is not giving us the loan, or whatever, the family support I'm not getting, whatever it may be, but we tend to think of externals. But The Mountain Within is all about conquering what is inside us, because I think we will all acknowledge in our quiet, reflective moments that the thing that actually keeps us from really being the person that God wants us to be is not the mountains out there. Because Jesus said, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can move the mountains, right? Those mountains out there. It's the mountain inside. It's the mountain within. So it's conquering the mountain within. And Kilimanjaro is very beautiful in the sense that, yes, we had this enormous mountain to climb, but particularly as we were approaching the final ascent, it was all about mind over matter. So the mountain within. But let me just take you with me to the mountain outside. How many here have actually climbed Kilimanjaro? Oh, fabulous. Great, great. When did you do it? Recently? 2003. Fantastic. 2007, super. Well, the second time we did it in 2008. And for those of you who have climbed Kilimanjaro, you know it's the world's tallest freestanding mountain. If you think in feet, it is 19,345 feet. And I tell you, by the time you get to the top, you feel every foot. It's every pebble under your foot. So it's 19,345 feet, or 5,895 meters if you think in meters. Mount Kilimanjaro has very much become a symbol of climate change. It is such a beautiful, beautiful mountain. And just 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of flying from Nairobi to Dar es Salaam. And generally, the mountain is cloud covered. You don't see anything. But this morning was crystal clear. It was one of those fabulous, fabulous mornings. And I could see Kilimanjaro beautifully and Meru in the distance. But there is very little by way of glaciers left. So if you still want to climb and have some snow under your feet, you need to go now. There is not a lot of There are not a lot of glaciers left. As Rick alluded to in the biography, there are several routes up Kilimanjaro. The one that people tend to take and that is most publicized and the celebrities tend to take is actually called by the locals the Coca-Cola route, because it is much, much easier. The Machame route that we took, and with express gratitude from our disabled climbers, is called the whiskey route by the locals. So we took the whiskey route. We're teetotalers, but we took the whiskey route. So here we are. Our team of 7 disabled climbers, 6 from the UK, 1 from Saudi Arabia. Each disabled climber is actually buddied in a buddy system with 1 or 2 non-disabled climbers. And the idea was very much that the non-disabled climbers would actually support their disabled buddies. That was the idea. This was all a volunteer effort. Everybody who was involved with this volunteered their time, their talent. The film that we produced was a labor of love. We had top cinematographers, top composers, and so forth involved, and it was just incredible what people were actually willing to give. And this is really the first point I want to make, that does not come as news to anybody here in this room, and that is leading volunteers is the most leadership-intensive exercise. Because if you really think about it, when you lead volunteers, you don't have a carrot and you don't have a stick. You know, in business, we can fire people. In business, we can pay people. But when you lead volunteers, you really appeal to people's intrinsic desires, and you appeal to a much higher purpose. So if you really want to see who the leaders are amongst us, or the leaders in our teams, just see who is leading volunteers, because those are really the leaders. Here, as you can see, we still look pretty good, and if you could smell us, we still smell pretty good. This is at the beginning of our journey, and we're smiling. We are in good shape. What have I learned from this? You know, I've been in business a long time, but there was something, and the fact that this expedition took place in July of 2008, and then really the financial crisis hit in September of 2008, just really concentrated my mind in a way that it hadn't before. What have I learned from this, and what can I share? The book has 16 lessons, but I'm just going to touch, in the interest of time, I'm going to touch on just a few. But I want to start with something that is not particularly glamorous. Ruthlessly prepare. When I arrived in the States, and I really appreciated Gil's comments about his background and giving us a glimpse of where he's coming from. When I arrived in the States as a teenager with really nothing but the clothes on my back, we actually had paid to relinquish our citizenship, and had no money whatsoever. I actually studied the dictionary to perfect my English. And I would read the dictionary till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, go figure. But one thing that really struck me is that only in the dictionary do you find achievement and success before work. We have talked a number of times this morning about the importance of hard work, and it is so true. Hard work means preparation. Robert Schuller put it this way. He said spectacular achievement is always preceded by unspectacular preparation. Nobody sees the preparation, and I have to admit, when people come up to me and say, "You live such an amazing life. You are so lucky," some unchristian attitudes kind of well up. You know, I want to tell people it has nothing to do with luck. It has to do, everything to do with God's blessings, and it has to do with ruthless preparation. As a founder of the Women's Leadership Group for the Princess Trust, I had the opportunity of hosting some really wonderful events. One that was absolutely memorable was at the Houses of Parliament in London. We had a small luncheon with about 10, 12 people, and Margaret Thatcher was our guest of honor. Margaret Thatcher at this time was in her early 80s, 82, 83. It was just a few years ago. People commented that she had dementia. How many have seen the film The Iron Lady, by the way? Quite a few. Well, having had the privilege of meeting Mrs. Thatcher, I thought they did a hatchet job on her and her husband. It was really unfortunate. But here was Mrs. Thatcher, and I was dying to ask her two things. I wanted to ask her to what she attributed her success, and I wanted to ask her why her relationship with Ronald Reagan was so fruitful. And we took turns to make sure that everybody had a chance to sit next to her. And when my turn came, I asked her to what she attributed her success. And then I did shut up, Gil, after that. I wanted to hear what she had to say. And she said three things. She said, my parents. And to me, she said my parents. Normally, she would say my father. But to me, she said my parents taught me the importance of hard work. Secondly, integrity, and she has very piercing blue eyes, and she said integrity. People may not like what you stand for, but they have a right to know what you stand for. And then this blew me away. She put her hand on my arm, and just parenthesis here, before the event, we had given our biographies to her PA, and we thought that's as far as it goes. But then number three, when she put her hand on my arm, she said, and like you, I'm a tax lawyer by training, and I always know my facts. I was blown away. I was blown away. I mean, not only had the mighty Margaret Thatcher read our biographies, she knew who was sitting next to her, and she made the connection. And I walked out of there thinking, you know, no wonder this woman was successful. No shortcut. The preparation, the ruthless preparation. Unbelievable. And I kept thinking, if Margaret Thatcher can prepare like this while she's in her 80s and has dementia, my goodness, I don't have an excuse. Ruthless preparation. I'm on the board of Volans, and it's a think tank, and one of the things that we are focusing on right now is how do we lead and what do we need during this time of change, because there is no normal anymore. What we have is a new normal. We need to lead differently and think differently, and to focus on IQ and EQ, while important, is not sufficient. And so Volans actually came up with this idea of FQ, which stands for future quotient. How many have heard of the future quotient? A couple. Great. Okay, we have a lot more work to do. Because the idea of the future quotient, and I think this is where we as Christians actually have an edge, because there is such a thing as prophecy. The idea of future quotient is basically that we cannot just look at the quarterly results. We have to look down the road. We have to look a lot farther down the road and see what steps we need to take in order to anticipate what is happening down the pike. And if we as Westerners want to compete with the Asians, we need to think long term. We think quarterly. They think 10 to 15 years. That's the difference. So thinking in terms of future quotient, I'm comforted by the fact that God doesn't do anything except he reveals it to his servants, the prophets. And so we know, as students of Scripture, we have a pretty good feel what's happening. And I think Don used the term clairvoyant. Clairvoyant. It's an interesting characteristic. But this idea of future quotient. I love the German philosopher Friedrich Hegel, who said the future determines the present, and the present determines the past. And let me use that, and that's a mouthful. Let me use that as the next one. Remember, the future determines the present, and the present determines the past. The second lesson I learned was to fail fast and fail forward. John Maxwell has written a whole book entitled Fail Forward, so this is not original with me. But the idea of failing fast, the idea of failing forward, I believe is absolutely essential for people who succeed. It's resilience and it's our attitude toward failure. Those are absolutely essential to determine whether we succeed and live a life of significance. I remember one morning, I'm quite perfectionistic, and one morning I was beating myself up about something stupid I had done, and it was just grumbling over my muesli there, and my husband just listened to me without real advice or recrimination, really. He just listened. But when I got to the office, there was a text on my BlackBerry, and it went like this: do you know why the windshield of a car is so large and the rear view mirror is so small? Because the future is a lot more important than the past. And I thought, okay, I got it. So why was the second expedition that I led up Mount Kilimanjaro so much more successful? I firmly believe if I had achieved my goal that first time around, I know myself, I would have checked the box, that's it. But it was a failure. It was an absolute failure. We got to the Barranca Wall at 4,200 meters and we had to turn back. But I learned so much from that expedition that didn't go well. And you know, often, particularly in business, you hear people talk about their successes. Well, that's great. And then we almost give the impression like we got there overnight. Well, those successes are laced with an awful lot of failure and an awful lot of tears and an awful lot of repositioning, because I'm told entrepreneurs change their business model about 5 times before they are successful. There is a lot of that toing and froing. And the second expedition happened because, as I said, it was unfinished business. The fact that I had tried and failed actually helped me to anticipate what the issues were, and it actually gave me the confidence to do something so much bigger than I would have done in the first place. So the idea of failing fast is, let's learn from the failure, but then not dwell on it. Let's move on and move forward. It was actually Thomas Edison, I believe, who coined this idea of failing forward, and we are all indebted to this amazing man who just never gave up, and so we have the light bulb. But he commented on, among other things, but he commented on Woodrow Wilson. He said, "They say President Wilson has blundered. Perhaps he has, but I notice he usually blunders forward." So fellow blunderers, let's blunder forward. Whatever we do here today, let's blunder forward. The third lesson that I want to touch on is keep your winning team strong. This is all about having the right people in the right chairs at the right time. And that may mean that you have to tell people, you cannot continue this journey with me. This was actually the hardest thing as we were going up Mount Kilimanjaro. We knew not everybody would make it to the top. Even with fully able-bodied people, the success rate is very low. But, at least on the whiskey route it is. But to have 7 disabled climbers in our team, we knew not everybody would make it. And we actually managed the expectations very carefully. We said, this is an attempt to summit Kilimanjaro. It's an attempt to summit Kilimanjaro. But knowing that not everybody could make it to the top, we actually, by the time we got to the Barranca Wall, we had to send 3 of our disabled climbers down and a number of the buddies who were actually very, very ill. And the idea, but then then that freed up the team to actually continue to the summit. So keeping your winning team strong is actually so important. And those of us who, whatever we lead, whatever we achieve, we know that at the end of the day, it's really the team that makes or breaks us. And it was none other than Albert Einstein who said beautifully, he said, 100 times a day I remind myself that my internal and external life depends on the fruit of the work of other men, living and dead, and I shall give in the same way that I have received and am receiving. It's about the team, and we acknowledge that the people around us make all the difference, for better or for worse. So keep your winning team strong. Let me give you a couple pictures here. This is one of our climbers, Jamie McGee. He was the most physically challenged climber. He had an accident. A car hit him when he was only 5 years old. So Jamie exhibited all the symptoms of a stroke victim. So he had two buddies with him. One of the people climbing with us, his brother Brian McGee. Interestingly enough, Brian ended up buddying with another James, and James Bridges. I became very, very fond of James. These two were an amazing team, and these two made it to the top. Somebody talked earlier about we have created an environment that is enabling when the businessman sold his business for $500 million. And I feel this is what we did for James, because James was one of these very, very quiet people. He had been homeless. He had a spine injury. He was disenfranchised. And when we did the selection weekend to actually choose the disabled climbers, and the bar was very high because they had to raise 5,000 pounds, which is a lot of money to be able to go on this climb with us. When I saw James, he clearly wanted to do this, but he didn't say anything to anybody. He was leaning against the wall. And so I went up to him and I said, James, do you want to do this climb? And he said, yes, I really want to do this climb. And I said, well, you look very worried to me. What are you worried about? And he said, there is no way I can raise the money. And so I had a quick chat with Hans and said, and I went back to James and said, how about, James, if we adopt you for purposes of this trip? How about if we adopt you for purposes of this trip? And his eyes got like saucers, and he said, would you really do that? And I said, yes. James was the first disabled climber who reached the top of Kilimanjaro. And you can applaud at this because it was such an amazing thing, and you see it in the film. He's the first disabled climber to make it to the top, and when we had our closing dinner, if you will, on Sunday night after we had summited, he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, Herta, I'm not good at speeches, but I just want to thank you so much for making this possible. It changed my life. And I said, James, you're not good with speeches. I was choked up at this point. So that was a winning team. Those two made it. The other team, this is an interesting dynamic, and psychologists would probably have a heyday with this. Nobody who was not in a well-functioning team made it to the top. Nobody who was not in a well-functioning team made it to the top, and that included the film crew. This team, this is another James. It seems like that's the only name we have in the UK. This is James Smith. He's an autistic climber. Didn't say boo to a goose. Didn't say boo to a goose. Unbelievable. But he had never been out of the country. He had never traveled. So here he is. And we had teamed him up with Morgan Roy, a tall Australian, very, very active and very fit, and Claire. Now, Morgan and James didn't know each other. The first time they met was at Heathrow Airport. Claire and James had known each other for 10 years. And so we thought that teaming this group up would actually be a very, very good thing. For some reason, even though Claire and James had known each other for a long time, when it came to the trip, they didn't gel. Morgan and James, they were like, they had always looked for each other and found each other. Unbelievable the way those two clicked. And we always assumed that it would be the disabled people who would be supported by their non-disabled buddies. And this was one of these amazing stories. We got to 4,700 meters. This is just before the final ascent. And this is where altitude sickness really, really kicks in. And Morgan was so sick. He just turned to James and he said, "James, I am so sorry. I will not be able to go any farther." And James very quietly said, "That's okay, Morgan. I will make it to the top." And Morgan told me later, he said all he could think of was, "Oh, shh." And he said, "I cannot let him go by himself. There is no way under the sun I can let him go by himself." And so Morgan scrambles out. He goes to find one of our 3 doctors, gets pumped full with paracetamol and ibuprofen. His headache is getting a bit better. These 2 made it to the top. These 2 made it to the top. The person who didn't make it to the top was Claire. She was completely disenfranchised. She actually turned around halfway up the final ascent. And I can honestly say during this whole expedition, I felt God's pleasure on us. There was something amazing, this amazing feeling. And at the end of the expedition, we were down and Claire said to me, "You know, Herta, I could have made it to the top if I had had as much support as everybody else." And this was about the only time I lost my cool. I just wanted to punch her because I felt, you know, and all I said though was, I bit my tongue and all I said was, "Claire, we had 180 porters. All you had to do was ask." So you can draw your own conclusion. My buddy was none other than my wonderful husband, and here we look like 2 Austrian hikers. It's more like the Alps than Kilimanjaro. But in Europe at least, it has become a real fad for people to climb Kilimanjaro on their honeymoon. And people have asked me if that's a good idea. And all I can say is I'm very grateful that we had been married for a long time and a successful marriage at that, because I don't know what possessed me about 4 days into the climb. You know, you kind of do your best with the hygiene and all that stuff. There are no showers. You are intense the whole time. And I'm looking at Hans and I said, "You know, darling, you're becoming, you know, beards are growing, whatever." And I said to my husband, "You know, darling, you're becoming really hard to look at." Thank God he had the wisdom not to reciprocate, you know. And I'm taking a short nap. We were in between in our tents, and I wake up and the tent smells so nice. And I'm looking up, and there is my husband with my little Chanel mirror, and he's shaving. And for the rest of the trip, he really was the only man who looked terrific. So thank you, darling, for shaving. But it was this buddy system, and I know if it hadn't been for Hans, who actually packed an extra parka that I could use on our final ascent. I've lived in Michigan, I've lived in Transylvania, I know what cold is, I've been in New York, but I've never been so cold in my life. And Hans had an extra parka that I could use on that final ascent, because when you climb in the dark, in the cold, it's below freezing temperature. It's unbelievable. So I definitely had my own buddy. In the interest of time, I'm going to cut through this one. This is an amazing lesson. Deal wisely with criticism. We don't have time to go into it, nor do we have about this one. Always put the mission before ego. Just one sentence, and that is, I think particularly as Christians, I think we can all see the world is a much worse place because so many transactions, so many things are happening, whether it's mega mergers, whether it's leading countries, whatever, it's because the ego is before the mission. And as Christians, we have this amazing privilege to actually learn from the Master, because the people who really make a difference in this life, truly make a positive difference in this life, are very, very humble people. And when Moses is credited with being the meekest man on earth, there is a reason for that. Put a mission before ego. What we are doing is so much more important than any one of us. It doesn't mean that we lose our identity. As entrepreneurs, as leaders, we have a very strong sense of identity. And Isaiah, when he was in Isaiah chapter 6, when he had this incredible encounter with the God of the universe, with Elohim, holy, 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 at the end of the day, he could still say, "Here I am, send me." He hadn't lost his identity, but what he had lost was his ego. And he could see the mission that was so much greater than his ego. Here is a picture of Mount Kilimanjaro. These are pictures from my husband. It is an absolutely stunning mountain. And when you can see things clearly, it's just absolutely beautiful. And my heroes actually were the porters. They carried everything. As I said, because we were such a large expedition, we had about 180 porters. They carried everything, every egg we ate, every stool we sat on. They just carried everything on their backs for us. I want to leave you with this last lesson. Don't stay at the top too long. You know, when you get on top of Kilimanjaro, you have 50% less oxygen than you have at the bottom. And what oxygen deprivation does, for those of you who have climbed Kilimanjaro or who are used to high altitudes, you will know it has different effects on different people. I saw everything from people vomiting their guts out to one of our cameramen literally falling asleep while he was still filming. I saw people with splitting headaches, and I had a splitting headache again at around 4,700 meters, not at the top, thank God. My husband, who you will meet, is very polished and really a nice man. But on top of Kilimanjaro, under severe altitude sickness, he behaved like a surly drunk. And I was so grateful that he doesn't drink alcohol, because he's not a nice drunk. And our guide literally would come and he would flick his fingers in front of our faces and he would say, "Do you know my name? Do you know my name?" Because he wanted to know that we were still cogent. And so Hans just looks at him and says, "Yeah, so what?" I thought, geez, I don't know this man. He doesn't behave like this normally. It was like a complete change of personality. And for example, Hans wanted to sit here, but instead he sat here. All of a sudden, in this high altitude, people were behaving in ways that I did not expect them to behave. And the same is true in life. You know, whether it's in business or in politics or wherever, in academia, if you stay too long in an ivory tower, all of a sudden you start behaving in a silly way. And it shouldn't surprise us that people who stay cocooned, who lose touch with reality, that they are starting to make stupid decisions. There is something fundamental about this, and I've seen it in business. I at AIG with Hank Greenberg, with Sandy Weil in my Citibank days, etc. Something happens when people stay at the top too long and they think they're indispensable. The tendency is normal. We like the top. We like the top. I was speaking at a conference in Cairo in December of 2010. December of 2010, and my host was part of the Egyptian upper crust, and she invited me to a dinner party. At the dinner party, the creme de la creme of Cairo society, this person owns this person owns that, and she introduced me, Herta is my friend, blah, 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 and she said, and she's writing this amazing book, blah, and so I thought, I'm going to test this lesson. I'm going to test this lesson. And so I was surrounded by a number of people, and they said, well, what are you writing about? And I said, well, my last lesson in the book is don't stay at the top too long. And ladies and gentlemen, if looks could kill, I would not be here today. I remember a couple people looking at me like, what in the world is she talking about? And I remember one of the women looking at me and saying, the top is the only place to be. And I thought, okay, I'm a foreigner here. I may have had a VIP entrance, but I will not have a VIP exit if I push this too hard. So I shut up. But I did say to my friend in the evening, because she said, what did you think? And I said, I'm so sorry, my friend. I think you're in real trouble. Because what I saw there tonight and what I see on the street, there is such an enormous disconnect. I think you're in real trouble. Little did I know that 6 weeks later we would see the Arab Spring. I mean, I'm certainly not claiming to be clairvoyant, but I knew there was an enormous, enormous problem. And this is what happens if we stay at the top too long. It's dangerous on top, and we've seen it with the in Scripture as well. On the Mount of Transfiguration, when Peter, James, and John are there, and what is Peter's reaction? Let's stay here, right? It's nice on top of the mountain. Let's just make the tents. It's really good up here. And Jesus is saying, no. The work is in the valley. Breathe in, it's great, the mountain is beautiful. And I cannot thank the team around me enough, because when you stand on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, and we were so blessed because we had this incredible, incredible view. We could see the curvature of the earth. We had snow underneath our feet. We had the clouds beneath us. We had the sun above us. And that's our guide, Ellie and Hans and I. It's an incredible feeling. It's exhilarating to be at the top. The feeling of accomplishment is enormous. And it's only that sense of achievement is only augmented by the fact that you don't stand there alone, that you stand with people you love and people you have come to respect, and you've done it together. So the view from the top is terrific. This is a shot that Hans took from Uhuru Peak, from Kilimanjaro. And it was just, as you can see, one of these beautiful, beautiful days. So the view is fantastic at the top. And I feel a little bit, Rick, at this conference, we are at the top. We are really, we are in this rarefied environment that is just so spectacular. So I'm thoroughly enjoying being here. Thank you so much for having us. And we're going to have a great time the next couple days. But then I think we will all be energized to go back to the valley and to make a difference for His kingdom. Thank you.